As you know, on Sunday night or Monday morning of every week, we post a new expository semiotics explaining why we would choose which lectionary readings. But in these readings, our dream is, and our desire is, to help you read the signs and fondle the details and spot the seminal metaphors, the condensed signs and the stories that are key for preaching to a digital culture. So strap on your seatbelt and join us as we prospect our passages for today. And this is the lectionary homiletics reflections for the 17th of May, 2020. We have 4 very different texts this week. Acts 17, Psalm 66, 1 Peter 3, and we continue in our John 14 readings, and this one, verses 15 to 21. But I thought we'd just start say a few things about this incredible, one of the most classic texts in all of history, the speech that Paul gave at Mars Hill, the Athens apologetics, the apologia. And basically, that word apologia or apologetics is the definition is found later on in our 1 Peter text. Give reason for the hope that is in you. That's the basic definition of apologetics. So we begin with an example of somebody who actually gave reason for the hope that was in him. Now, the first thing you notice about this speech here in Acts 17 is that, and these is verses 22 to 31, although you got to read the whole speech to get it. But Paul knows his context. He has a high contextual intelligence. Uncle Beck and I have a book coming out on a high CQ, contextual quotient. Everybody needs, you know what an IQ is. We now know how important an EQ is, but you got to have a high CQ. And Paul's contextual quotient, his contextual intelligence is here. He begins, it's a clap and a slap, a clap and a slap. You know, there's an old saying that you warm the water before you drown the cat. And Paul, he's warming the water here, and then he drowns the cat, and he warms the water, and he drowns the cat. And so one moment he's congratulating them and quoting their own poets. In fact, that little phrase, "In him we live and move and have our being," we quote it all the time. But Paul's quoting a pagan poet. I mean, so you got some Christians say, well, you can't quote anything that's not Christian, and you quote anybody, how you dare quote somebody you don't agree with everything he ever wrote. Well, Paul does this here. He's quoting one of their own. And he's showing that this unknown God that they worship and adore, he actually says, you know, I know this unknown God better than you do. And I could tell you some things about this unknown God. And so it's a masterful way of showing them that he knows them. There's no understanding without standing under. So he stood under them. He's understood their culture. He's understood their philosophers. He knows their art and their poetry. And he's showing how it all points to Jesus. And Paul always ends. We got this thing about, you know, you got the story mode of the Gospels and the doctrine mode of Paul. No, it's all one story mode. And Paul's not giving doctrine. You read the letters. He's telling the story of Jesus. He died. He rose from the dead. He appeared to the apostles and to me. And he's coming back. That's Paul's message. And here, again, is great apologetics text. He ends with the resurrection of Jesus. I mean, what an incredible speech. And so you could do that. And that whole sermon could just be on, we all need to know our context. We all need, in some ways, to be locavores. We need to know our location really well. And Paul is proving that here. Our psalm, Psalm 66, verses 8 to 20. If I were doing this, I would focus on that one little clause here, that one little phrase. And the King James has, "Thou broughtest us into the net." But it really, I mean, that's one translation. But the best way of understanding this is that God swept us up when we least expected it. And this is how God works. When we least expect to be ambushed by the Spirit and to be just captured and captivated, when we're least expecting it, that's when the Spirit captures us. The word net here, caught up into the net. The word in the New Testament for equipping the saints, that little phrase, equipping the saints, really means mending the nets. And so what Paul is, what the psalmist is really saying here, and agreeing later with Paul about equipping the saints and mending the nets, is that we learn most when we're caught, not taught. That's when we learn the most, is when we're caught up in the net. And that's when we are equipped the best. Not when we're trying, but when it's organic, it's natural. And God sweeps us up when we least expect it. Equip the saints. So, you're equipped the most. We learn the most when we're caught up, when we're caught, not taught. John 14, we've spent 2 weeks on various portions of this. This is the third week. I love how Jesus, one time he'll elaborate what it means that he's the way, and other times he'll elaborate what it means that he's the life. Here he's elaborating what it means that he is the truth, the Spirit of truth. The truth, let's get this right, is a person. And it's not a principle, it's a person. That's the whole essence of the meaning of truth. Christians have a very weird definition of truth. We don't have an understanding of truth as some philosophical concept or some doctrine or some statement. Truth is a Savior. Truth is a person, and who calls us into a relationship. So we have the Spirit of truth is a relational presence and power. And that's the Comforter. That's what Paul's introducing here, the Paraclete. And that Spirit of truth dwells in us through the power of the Holy Spirit. Now, what I really would encourage you to think about, and you've got to trust the Spirit here, is where the Spirit's leading you with all these texts. But I can't get away from 1 Peter 3. And this, be ready to give an answer to the hope that is in you. Always be ready. But you've heard that phrase, be ready to give a reason for the hope that is in you. Ready to give a reason for the hope that is in you. But hear me. What comes before that, read this carefully. Sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and then be ready to give an answer to the hope that is in you. You're not ready yet until you sanctify the Lord in your hearts, until you've been equipped, caught in this net, this web of the Spirit, and tutored and equipped. So then you're ready to give reason for the hope that is in you. And the essence I would do is this understanding of hope. And this is a culture right now that is driven by fear, despair. This is a culture, uncertainty. It needs these three, And now abides faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these three is love. Well, sometimes it is, but sometimes the greatest of these three, depending on the context, may be faith. And sometimes, I think right now, the greatest of these three, right now, and what this culture needs the most is hope. So what does it mean to give reason for the hope? Doesn't say the love that's in you, doesn't say the faith that's in you. It's give reason for the hope that is in you. There's more to being a disciple than having faith. There's more to being a disciple than showing love. There is hope. These three, faith, hope, love, they belong together. Never forget hope. Always hope. Hope that is leavened in faith is heavened in love. Hope that is leavened in faith is heavened in love. The impossible is made possible through these three, faith, hope, and love. But hope is what is so needed right now. Hopelessness is the acid rain of faith, the nuclear winter of the Spirit. I'll never forget, at the end of the 20th century, Time magazine named Steven Spielberg the most influential person of his generation. In 2006, Steven Spielberg received the Kennedy Center honors for lifetime achievement. And when he was being introduced, Liam Neeson, the actor, introduced him, and I think it was that's where it occurred. But in the context of that conversation at the Kennedy Center, Liam asked him, what is your favorite ending to a movie? And I'll never forget what Steven Spielberg said: hope. His favorite ending to a movie was always leave them with hope. And sisters and brothers, you got a lot of stuff out there now, a lot of words out there now, a lot of prophets out there now. When you start seeing mushroom clouds swelling out of the scriptures, as some of these people are doing, run for cover. Run for cover. Not from the scriptures, but from those working the fog machines that are coming out of the scriptures. Because this is not the scriptures. The scriptures point us to hope. Followers of Jesus are high hopers. We are always heralding, even when we're sounding the alarm, we're never heralding the apocalypse. We are high hope people. And we always, when we leave, as Spielberg is saying, when we end the movie, we hoist the chalice of hope. And that's what we toast. We toast hope. We toast hope. Now, okay, you say, okay, that's nicely, you can say all that, sweet, but what does it mean, and what is the essence of hope? And this is where we got to get a biblical understanding of hope here. I don't care whether it's Hebrew or Greek. This is a unique feature of both Hebrew and Greek, their understandings of hope. And hope is not, oh, I hope it's going to be a blue sky day. It's not wishful thinking. It's not, oh, I really would like this to happen. If I could just hope that my kids will turn out okay. This is not what a biblical understanding is. Hope is not credulity. Hope is not optimism. Although, let me tell you, optimists over pessimists, this is a Mayo Clinic study, live 20% longer. You know, I think it was the CDC did a study of despair. And they found out that people who are in a pit of despair, their body is what they do to their body is equivalent of 1 pack a day. So if you're living out of despair and fear, you're smoking 1 pack a day of cigarettes. Just think about it. I mean, that's the biological damage, because you can't separate your mind as you think in your heart. So are you as you think in your heart. So you can't separate your head and your heart and your body. It's all one. So I'm not opposed to, optimism here, although I tend to be a pessimist myself. But I want to be the optimist. But hope is not just put a smile on your face and hope for the best. Quote. The Bible calls God the God of hope. And God is not an undecided being. God is extremely trustworthy, can be relied on. And that's why both in Hebrew and in Greek, the word for hope means expect, anticipate. Or in other words, stand steadfast on God's promises. That's what it means to hope. It's not wishful, optimistic, Pollyanna. No, hope is, I know this story, and I know how this story ends, and I am steadfast, not stubborn. I am steadfast in the expectation that God will keep God's promise as God has. So, hope is not, let's hope it turns out well. Hope is, however it turns out, God can bring good out of evil. However it turns out in the short run, I know the long run. And the long run is Christus Victor. Christus Victor. So you are approaching, we face the future with a posture of promise and anticipation. Hope is not expecting the best, but keeping the horizons open to the future, regardless of whether you get the worst or the best. But your horizons are always open and expansive, because we know the God of hope. And we know what is our hope, and that is Christ. I can't say this enough. We say, okay, Jesus is the foundation of our hope. No, he isn't. He's our very hope itself. Christ is hope. Our very hope itself is Christ. So Christians are not people who, our high hoping is not, just expect the best. No. I know whom I have believed and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which he's committed unto, which I've committed unto him against that day. Is that what? 2 Timothy 1? I know whom I have believed and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've committed unto him against that day. That's hope. Christ is my hope, and he will bring about what he has promised if I'm steadfast. It's so in this pandemonium out there. I just want to say to the church, our faith is made for times like this. This is the very essence of our faith. This is why we have these three: faith, hope, and love. We can face this and outface this. I think there's a book by Jean Vanier, and it's an old book. I mean, not all that old, it's about 20 years old, but he calls 7 signs of hope for a fearful world. And I just want to remind you of this. I wrote these down here, and so let me give them to you really quick, because if you wanted to do a 7-point sermon, you could do one here. But each one of these, it's like he wrote it for this COVID-19 world. But 7 signs of hope, the 7 paths to the future. Number 1, from humiliation to humility. Did you hear that? From humiliation to humility. Number 2, from normalization to the awakening of conscience and awareness. From normalization, in other words, Christians don't do normal. We were not meant to do normal. We were meant to awaken to the spirit of truth, the spirit of Christ. Number 3, from exclusion to encounter. That's one of the things we're discovering in our isolation, is how connected we are. Number 4, from power to authority. Number 5, from isolation to community. Number 6, from strength to vulnerability. And number 7, from secret to mystery. Live the mystery. Faith is not, the Christian life is not answers to be found or questions to be answered. It's a mystery to be lived. So I love these. I love these 7. Now, I want to end with kind of some of the symbols of hope that we have in our Christian tradition. The most obvious one is one we've talked about before, the anchor, Hebrews 6. That hope we hold is like an anchor that we cast before us. So think of a wave that comes at us, and as the wave comes at us, it curls, and it curls inward. So really, it curls backwards toward the past, but it pulls us out into the future. And that's the understanding here of hope is a future that pulls us as it comes at us, but it sweeps up the past, and it doesn't leave the past behind. It brings the past with us, but it pulls us out into the future, which is what the anchor was supposed to do: keep ships away from hugging harbors and bring them out into the deep. So one is the anchor. The other, sparrow, has been a very rich one. We don't have time to talk about that today, but one I just want to mention, and you probably know this one too because of Noah's doves. The dove has been a really rich symbol of hope. What would we do without dove? Because it rhymes with love. I mean, so in English, you got all these words that, not many, but dove, glove, heaven above, So you're looking for poetry. These are all the words that rhyme with love in English. It's interesting that the words that rhyme with love in Russia are blood and murder. So I don't know what that says about different cultures, but if you ever read a Russian novel, you may know something, feel that a little bit. But you also know, I hope, that dove is just a poetic word for pigeon. And I love to think of Christians as disciples of the dove. I mean, the symbol of the Holy Spirit is a trash bird. It's not an eagle. It's a trash bird. It's a bird that, just a pigeon. It's a pigeon, a white pigeon. I think of preachers in some ways are carrier pigeons, bringing messages from heaven to earth, often across enemy lines. And whatever that message is that a carrier pigeon brings with it, it's got to be a billy do. It's got to be a love letter. It's got to be a letter of a call to faith, and it's got to hoist the chalice of hope. It's got to bring, because carrier pigeons bring hope. By the way, pigeons are a remarkable bird. Did you know that pigeons, different winds have different smells, so pigeons can smell the winds and orient themselves accordingly, navigating in an olfactory gradient? I mean, that's how they fly. It's not just, they don't look, they smell the winds, and so they know where the winds are coming from. And I mean, these are masters of the wind. There's 300 wild species of pigeons, the most common of which is the rock dove, the rock pigeon, the common pigeon. But the other thing in terms of when I was thinking about this, the pigeon, I also thought about how Noah and all that are to be saved get into the ark, and God locks them in. They had a lockdown. The ark was a lockdown. And they were God locked. They weren't government locked. That's a whole other story here, but they were God locked. And sometimes God saves us with some lockdowns. And maybe we need to experience what it might be to be God locked sometimes. The other one, the one I want to end with, is my favorite one. And this is the ostrich egg. And this was a very early Christian symbol of hope. Every church, after we started building churches, we basically, it was all about the table, and we ate at homes. And then when we started creating places to congregate outside the homes, unfortunately we used the basilica model, so we had rows but so the question is, where do you face all those rows, and how do you properly orient? And that was the word. Every church before it was dedicated had to be oriented, and that word orient, as you know, means east. And so a church architecturally, a Muslim church faces Mecca, a Christian church faces the rising sun. Sun sets in the west, but it rises in the east. And the east is supposed to be a symbol of the Garden of Eden as well. And so every church had to be oriented, had to be properly faced towards the future. And the symbol of that facing, that a church had been faced. And you see this, if you've ever been to the Church of the Nativity, but churches throughout the Middle East that you can visit, they have it many times the light fixtures, which is where it is in the Church of the Nativity, but they have an ostrich egg. And the ostrich egg is that symbol. Not only the church had been oriented and it was properly facing the world and the horizons of hope, but that it was oriented towards Christ. And this is the story very quickly. The idea of the ostrich putting its head in the sand is fiction. It's a nice little legend, but it's cute, but it's not unique about the ostrich. These ostrich eggs are kind of not just snacks, they are banquets. And every predator out there wants to find an ostrich egg. The ostrich is an amazing bird, but one of the things that's amazing about it is not his brain. It's got the brain size of a pea. I mean, it's basically, that's where bird brain comes from. It's not very smart. And so an ostrich quickly forgets where it hid its eggs in the desert. And it has to hide them really well because everybody else is trying to find them. And so what an ostrich will do is it will lay its eggs, hide them in the sand, cover them up so it looks like nothing. And then they will wander way to kind of decoy and detour other predators out there looking for their once in a lifetime banquet. But the problem with the ostrich, and there's a proverb about it, it's as cruel as an ostrich in the desert, and that's what it refers to, is that ostriches will quickly forget, oops, where did I bury my children? And so what the ostrich has to do, you got to give it a very big brain, but I gave it eagle eyes. I mean, it can see miles away, pinpoint accuracy. And so an ostrich has to always keep one eye. It can wander a long ways away from where those eggs are, as long as it keeps one eye on the place in the desert where it buried its children. Because if it ever takes its eye off that place in the desert where it buried its eggs, it's forfeited its future, it's abandoned its children, and it's lost hope. And so for the early church, this was a huge symbol. It's a wild world out there. There's a lot of predators, a lot of enemies, a lot of dangers. We can go out there, though, with hope, with confidence. But only if we never take our eyes off of Christ. Because if we ever take our eyes off of him, if we ever lose that proper orientation, we'll have forfeited our future. We'll have lost our children. We'll have abandoned hope. And so I have a little place in my study, I'm going to show you just right now, where I write on the couch. I don't do desk. This is about as desky as I get. And I sit on the couch, I write, but always when I look up, I'm facing an ostrich egg. And a symbol of a church and a ministry and you, properly oriented towards Christ, who is our hope. When I lecture here at Advances, I sit in an ostrich chair. Most of the time I forget to tell my students why I'm sitting in this ostrich chair. Well, they're all in nice couches and quote, comfortable, although I have friends that say there's not a butt-worthy chair in Sweet's house, but we have a lot of antiques. But my ostrich chair is one of the least butt-worthy chairs. But I sit there because it is my way of symbolizing in everything that I do, everything I say, everything I am. I want to be oriented towards the hope that is Jesus the Christ and the horizons of the future that he is opening up for us, even in the midst of a world like we have today. Semiotics is the art of angling, of turning things askew, upside down, inside out, cattywampus, sunny side up, over easy, scrambled, hard-boiled. We hope you enjoyed today's journey, but always remember, it's more important you prepare the preacher than you prepare the sermon.